Fuck Nazis. All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome. Oh, shit. Sorry.
Oh, no.
The Nazis got me.
Hang on.
Damn internet Nazis.
All right. Sorry,
Wait,
already.
Hold on.
Okay.
Let's see. Yes. Wait a second. How do I just get rid of this? Sorry.
The X next to the track.
Oh, okay. There it is. Yeah. Okay. I'm ready now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 396 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
Cam Watson.
And in today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be taking a very controversial stand. I am so sorry to our fascist Cinematary listeners. But
I'm not.
But we are talking about a trio of anti-fascist, or not anti-fascist, but like a look into the recent rise in fascism via YouTube videos.
They're anti.
Well, they are, but like they're even more just kind of a deep dive into figures of figures of fascism in modern
profiles and anti
profiles in fascism.
Yeah.
And opposition thereof.
Yeah.
Exactly. But before we talk about a bunch of fascists, let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And Andrew, I'm going to kick it off with you since you have the new release.
Yeah, so the new release in the indie sphere this week, though it's getting played in multiplexes too, is the movie X by horror filmmaker Ty West, who I think most people probably know for his movie The House of the Devil, which came out in 2009.
Covered on this podcast.
We've never done a part 2 dedicated to it, I don't think, but I talked about it.
Did.
Wait, did we really?
Because we did. It was our Greta Gerwig series.
Greta Gerwig. Yeah, go listen to the Greta Gerwig series where we talked about her role in House of the Devil where she gets shot in the face.
Yeah.
But that's a really good movie. That is a movie that it feels like it's plucked from another time. Ty West does a really great job at capturing an old, like late 70s, early 80s style of camera work and video effects. And it is not a movie that's really about a whole lot. It's just vibes. It's just kind of pure, the mechanical lizard brain horror. And it's done really, really, really well. And he has kind of taken a bit of a break from horror movies as far as I know. I think his last movie was a Western, In a Valley of Violence in 2016. And he's back with X. It is an A24 distributed movie. And when I heard that Ty West was making an A24 horror movie, I was not quite sure how to think about that, because he is very much like one of these indie horror directors that are so like in vogue these days. But it wasn't necessarily as in vogue when he started doing it with House of the Devil, and like the whole minimalist A24 horror house style thing sort of got codified a bit later. So I was wondering if Ty West coming into the A24 stable would mean he would be trying to do that thing, the It Comes at Night hereditary witch thing, or if he would be bringing his own styles to the table, that his own like kind of throwback retro style, or something totally different. And I think it's kind of a combination of the latter two. He does a little bit of I should probably give the premise of the movie first before I talk about the style of the movie. This movie is kind of a riff on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is about a group of pornographers, 2 actresses, 1 actor, a cinematographer, and a director, who have rented out this it's not like a cabin but it's like a house that's on the property of this farmer guy.
It's called an
And
Airbnb.
it's an Airbnb. Though I believe this is set in the past. This is set in the past. So there's not an Airbnb, but it's essentially an Airbnb. And they're going to use this house they've rented to shoot a rural themed porn film. And they have not told this guy that they are going to shoot a porn film there. And initially, the main conflict of the movie is they are, trying to conceal the fact that they're shooting porn from this obviously very traditional conservative guy. And then the movie turns on a dime about halfway through, and then it becomes a slasher movie. And I won't give a lot of details on how exactly the slashing happens, but as somebody who typically is not a big creative kills guy, like that's not what I'm going to horror movies for. And I sometimes think that praising them is kind of icky. There are some really great, like pretty much every kill in this movie is like memorable and spectacular. So once it does get to the slasher part, there's a lot of fun to be had there. But I think that both halves of this movie are like equally good and equally interesting in different ways. I mentioned that he kind of plays with a little of the throwback, like vintage style filmmaking here, but it's because it's a movie in a movie. You like see the porn that they're shooting. That's the stuff that looks like it's plucked from another time, and he does that really well. Everything else is a little bit more like conventional, what you would expect a modern horror movie to look like. Though I think it's way less interested in a lot of the like minimalist indie, like symmetrical, one perfect shot sort of compositions that are kind of really common in the genre these days. Instead, I think it's almost doing kind of a James Wan-y sort of thing of like being really intentional about putting the camera in various places to maximize the fear of that moment or whatever. There's a lot of thoughtful camera placements and camera moves and things like that. One thing that like immediately sort of sets the tone for what he's going to be doing with the filmmaking of this is that the opening shot, I'm going to do my best to describe this, is like of the property that they're going to be renting. But you're seeing it through a barn door. Like, so the camera's inside the barn, you're seeing the property from through that doorway. And because of where the door is placed, it looks like it's in a 4:3 aspect ratio, old like 70s aspect ratio. And then as it zooms in, it becomes like the more modern thing, which is kind of just a fun, they know what they're doing, wink at the audience. But the movie is kind of full of stuff like that. And I think that this movie is like really thematically interesting too. It's very much about like the conservative repression of sexuality and like attitudes toward casual sex and porn. The antagonists of the movie. This is not a slasher, like a sex equals death slasher where people who are sexually promiscuous get punished for it. But the antagonists of the movie are people who very much like disagree with a more sexually liberated lifestyle and are kind of begrudgingly, or not begrudgingly, resentfully trying to kill off these, young, free thinking types. And I've actually seen some reviews on Letterboxd take issue with the movie because of how the characters are quote unquote punished. And I saw a reviewer say that one particular character didn't deserve to be punished. I feel like that's kind of missing the point. I think that like we are supposed to, like, this is a slasher movie. We're not kind of cheering for the dead teenagers to become dead teenagers. It's actually a movie where like the fact that they're being killed is sort of a moral tragedy. But it's still kind of thrilling to watch just because of how well it's shot and how good the actors are. So I thought this was really, really good. It's been a while since I've seen an indie horror movie in a theater that I thought was thrilling in this way. Because again, they've kind of become very samey. They've become very cookie cutter. And I'll definitely recommend going to see it. One quick postscript that I should have mentioned earlier is that because it's kind of a meta movie about people making a movie. There is sort of a Ty West character in it, but instead of it being a author insert, like here's the guy who's right about everything sort of character, like the horror nerd in Cabin in the Woods, the like pretentiousness of that character and like the fact that he is trying to make not just pornography but cinema is some, like, it's taking it seriously. This movie does think that pornography is a form of cinema and is a form of art, which I think is a point that I agree with. But it's also kind of like taking the piss out of this guy who's maybe taking himself a little bit too seriously, and like trying to bring some what he calls avant-garde or what felt to me kind of like French New Wavy sort of editing techniques and stuff to the porn that he's shooting. So interesting movie, like exciting movie in kind of like a accessible popcorn movie sort of way. All the
how is Mia Goth? Because I think she's not generally a person they put in like a starring role.
Yeah, this is either one of her first leading roles or her first leading role, and she does a really great job at it. She's playing a character who is like it meant to be seen as like extremely sexually alluring, which is not necessarily like the role that she's been typecast as in other movies. She kind of gets typecast as sort of the Grimes-esque like weirdo looking person, like in Claire Denis' High Life or something. But like she does a really, really great job at selling that and like creating a sort of pathos for that character as well. Which I think is generally a thing that this movie does really well. It also gives a lot of empathy towards the antagonist as well in a way that I wouldn't expect. But I thought that Mia Goth did a really great job. Also, Kid Cudi is in this movie, which I didn't recognize him at the time because I guess I just didn't know what Kid Cudi looked like. But I thought that his acting was really impressive as well. So good marks all around for me on X.
All right. Well, and like you said, that's in the theaters now. So it seems like it's much more. It's A24, so it's getting a wider release than you would expect. Well, cool. Let's shift it over to Cam, who's going to talk about all of his past lives.
Yeah. So this is a movie that y'all have talked about before on like the 200th episode or something, right?
Yeah, 200 episodes ago we talked about it.
Yeah. So when I bring up a 200 episode old movie here,
recalling our past episodes.
We're recalling past episodes. I watched Uncle Boonmee, Who Can Recall His Past Lives.
Oh, damn it. His past lives.
Forgot the his. I think that's in there, right?
It's in there.
It's in there.
All right.
It's what, 2011, 2010, something like that.
That sounds right.
It's a Thai movie by Apichatpong. What's the last name?
Apichatpong
Weerasethakul.
Yeah, that guy. And I have been like thinking about seeing this movie for a really long time. It's like sort of been something that's always been, I'll catch that. I need to catch that. I'll catch it eventually, type of thing. And
that's one of his past lives, is that he was eventually going to watch Uncle Boonmee.
So me and Swafford have been trying to kind of like chop through parts of movies that we want to see and watch list type of stuff. And we were talking about it, and he was like, "Well, you haven't seen Uncle Boonmee, so let's watch that." And so we, along with Jesse and Jessica, watched it last week, and it was like way better than I thought it was going to be. It's kind of rare for me now for a movie to kind of be on my radar for a really long time, and then when I do see it, it kind of like it's still something that I don't know, if to meet expectations is kind of rare, I guess. Typically, if I'm like thinking about a movie for a really long time and hearing people talk about it and stuff like that, by the time I actually get around to seeing it, it's normally something that is kind of like diminished, I guess, in a way. But that wasn't the case for this at all. It's like I don't know, to me, basically like a perfect movie. I can't really like find very much about it that I didn't like. If for the people who haven't heard the 200th episode where it was described much more colorfully, it's about a guy who is, having like renal and kidney failure and stuff like that, and he's sort of like approaching the tail end of his life, and it's just sort of meditating on that, but also not just that, but like what the connections people have with other people, but also the place that they're from, and like kind of just like the earth itself more broadly, and existing in the context of the time and place that you are, and juxtaposing that with other times and other places, or other times in the same place. And it is kind of meditating on a thing that I think is really interesting, or have been really interested in lately, which is like the framing kind of like a ghost story, but it's not intended to be like scary, really. There are parts of Uncle Boonmee that are kind of spooky.
One scene in particular is very unsettling.
Yeah. But for the most part, kind of like ghosts and shades of the past and all that are sort of like brushing in and out of like the forefront of the movie. And they're normally not even like seen as like something to be startled at. Like they kind of walk in and, see a ghost and are like, oh, it's you, what's up? And so it's this concept of like, not necessarily like the friendly ghost thing, but like an ambivalence. And in some cases it is like like a shade that is a ghost of something that is attached to a person specifically because of like the intimacy of a relationship they used to have. And I think that stuff like that is really interesting. And Uncle Boonmee does that in a way that I hadn't seen done before. And it's just this kind of warm, slow movie that can really kind of like work its way into the back of your brain. And I have thought about it a whole lot since I've seen it.
Yeah.
I know both of y'all have seen it as well. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Jack and I think are both really big fans of it. I'm wondering though, Cam, as somebody who has watched a handful of like quote unquote slow cinema movies and watched some of them with me, I'm wondering how you feel like a Pitchapong style like feels similar or different to what you tend to think of as slow cinema, because he's definitely one of the biggest names in it.
So I kind of thought going into it that it would be more similar to other slow things that I have watched, and I was kind of surprised and pleasantly surprised at how different it really did feel for the most part. Where I feel it's something that I mentioned to you after we watched it, Andrew, is that like I feel sometimes that effectively and for good reason in some cases that like slow movies are often using time as a way to kind of like batter you or like wear you down in a certain way, get you to feel a certain kind of way. Whereas with Boonmee, I don't know about the rest of Pitchapong's filmography because I haven't seen anything else of his, but the slow pace of it and the lingering shots and the decision to like stay on scenes that other movies might cut away from and stuff like that, it feels more like inviting and it feels more like lived in, I guess, whereas typically I see that sort of like slow pace thing deployed more, not, I don't want to say antagonistically, but it's deployed in a way that is not supposed to be, it's supposed to be enjoyed a different way, I guess. Like it's supposed to be enjoyed as a way that it is building this sort of atmosphere. And in this, it kind of just feels like somebody is like opening a door for you and letting you into their house. It's very like welcoming and like you just kind of feel like you get to settle into the movie because of that, because of the pace, as opposed to feeling kind of oppressed by the pace of it, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree. The idea of feeling like trapped by a movie is like a thing that I think, like you said, can be done for good effect. Like something like Jean Dielman, I think is like the perfect example of how you can use that interestingly. But Apichatpong's movies they just feel so like warm-hearted and like, I mean, they're sometimes about difficult subject matter, but they're like tackling it in a way that kind of makes you kind of feel at peace with the whole thing.
I mean, I think Boonmee is tackling pretty difficult subject matter too, you know? I mean, it's about a guy dying, really.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of about like his remorse for like the war crimes that he committed in the past,
right,
as well.
It is kind of sitting at the edge of something that I think could normally be interpreted as very, very sad. And I think that there are parts of Boonmee that do feel a little sad, but I think for the most part, it is kind of this, like, by the time you get to the inevitabilities of what the movie is setting up, you are in the same mindset as he is, which is this kind of like acceptance of what's happening. And I think that is really, really hard to do. Like, to make a movie where, you know, you're calling this shot essentially way down the line, and you want the audience to engage with, you know, this central character that has this tragedy thing going on. But you're not really trying to just like gut them at the end of it. You're trying to make them kind of go along this thing with him.
It does end with a pop song.
It does. But yeah, it was really, really good. I really liked it. I am really excited to see more of his movies.
Memoria is coming to actual theaters soon. We're getting it in June. Stoked for that.
Yeah.
It'll be exciting to see it finally. Also, I think Uncle Boonmee, for people who have not seen any of his movies, is probably a good starting point if you're interested.
I agree. Yeah.
Oh, and without like really talking about, I mean, I don't even know what the word spoiler would mean with regards to this movie, but there is a scene in particular that, that I like. There is a part where this thing that has been like, you know, set up as like a monster, kind of like spooky thing in the woods. One of them comes into his house and sits down and has dinner with him. And it is, I mean, for like the 15 or so minutes that this is kind of the focus of the movie, I was like, this is the best movie I've ever seen in my life. I have never seen anything better than this. Like, this thing that is such a, like, this nasty goon that the movie has made seem so ominous, coming in and just kind of sitting down to eat dinner, and then being like, the worst thing about him is kind of that he's just sort of like offbeat with the rest of the family. And he's kind of like, it's bright in here, my eyes hurt.
Oh my gosh, and they turn the lights off and they all just sit in the dark with it.
He's like, oh, my eyes. Yeah. And he's just, I don't know. I loved him so much. And I loved that scene so much.
Me too. That is my favorite scene in the movie. And this was my first time watching it with the my current TV setup. I have a sound bar and some nicer speakers that I didn't have when I watched this before. And the sound design, I mean, Apichatpong versus Ethical sound design is always really good, but in that scene in particular, like, he has this like droning like horror bass in the background that I noticed that I never noticed before. That was just amazing.
And like, kind of against that sort of drone, when the ghost guy is talking, he's got this very like slight little voice, and he's very like soft, very calm, sounds very like calm, and like every word he's thinking so much about it when he's talking. And it's interesting, like, pairing that and then you can also hear, like, you know, insects and the sound of nature, and because they're kind of sitting in this like a
it's like outdoor, a porch,
like kind of like a porch area, and so you can hear like insects and the wind and trees and stuff like that, and then that like pulsing kind of drone, and then this guy just kind of like muttering over top of it. It's amazing. It's so good.
All right, well, Uncle Boonmee, who can recall his past lives. It's streaming and things occasionally, so it usually pops up on like the Criterion channel if you have that. So Cool. Well, going from slow cinema to something that's vastly different from anything you just described, I'm going to talk about What's Up, Doc.
Hey.
This is a 1972 film from the late Peter Bogdanovich. Stars Barbara Streisand, Ryan O'Neal, a couple familiar Mel Brooks faces, Madeline Kahn and Kenneth Mars. I believe this is the first movie that Madeline Kahn is actually in. But yeah, this is a screwball comedy. It's one of my favorite types of movies because everything is so fucking stupid. Nothing makes any sense. Everybody is just absurd, and I loved every second of it. The plot, if like that's important to you, is Ryan O'Neal has traveled to San Francisco to go to. I gotta look up real quick what is the conference? He's like. His like job, his whole thing is that he like plays music with these rocks. Yeah, he's a musicologist from the Iowa Conservatory of Music, and he's coming to this musicology convention in San Francisco because he's trying to impress this like millionaire guy who's going to give this grant, and he's going to get a grant so that he can play all of these prehistoric rocks that like play music. And so he's visiting San Francisco with his fiance, who's played by Madeline Kahn, and her name is Eunice, which is just funny in itself. And when he gets to San Francisco, you have like this movie takes the whole concept of the MacGuffin from Hitchcock and is like, instead of like one MacGuffin, what if we just have like 15 MacGuffins and just have stuff that constantly doesn't lead to anything? Again, hallmark of like a great movie in my mind. And so so pretty much. 4 people, there's these 4 identical plaid overnight bags that are just circulating through this hotel. One of them is with Ryan O'Neal's rocks. One of them is with Barbara Streisand's character, who is pretty much a live action embodiment of Bugs Bunny, who just has like her clothes in it. Then you have another bag that is owned by this heiress who like has all of these like fancy diamonds in them, and then you have another bag that is filtering between this one guy and then another guy played by Michael Murphy, and it's like these government documents or whatever, these top secret government documents. So for the majority of the movie, it's just these bags getting switched between these different people in these different places. And really, it's like you have these 2 like government agents who are trying to get the secret documents from one another. Then you have this whole plot with like the concierge and this freelance detective guy who are trying to rob this woman of her diamonds. And then you have Barbara Streisand, who's just there to bug the shit out of Ryan O'Neal. This movie very much goes down into like the lineage of just bugging the hell out of the main male character. I would put it with A New Leaf, Heartbreak
Nice.
Kid, just like those types of movies where the main character is just constantly annoyed by somebody, and that's where the comedy is. And yeah, I mean, that's the whole movie is everybody's trying to get the correct bag. Barbara Streisand's trying to annoy Ryan O'Neal as much as possible. Kenneth Mars is in it, and I love Kenneth Mars, and he plays like this other musicologist who wants to get his grant so he can like investigate Scandinavian composers, and so he's like he's constantly like butting heads with Ryan O'Neal's character. Ryan O'Neal's great in this movie because he's like peak, just like hot guy, but stupid. because pretty much like this whole movie is just a live action Looney Tunes cartoon. And so, and the great thing about it is you have like Barbara Streisand being Bugs Bunny because she's just constantly creating chaos wherever she goes. And then you have Ryan O'Neal, who's just kind of just a dumbass the entire time, but also like is kind of trying to keep things like in order. And then Madeline Kahn's character is wonderful because she's constantly like kind of breaking that wall of how fucking annoying it would be if you were stuck in like a live action Looney Tune cartoon. And constantly kind of having to break you out of that. I mean, at times, like Ryan O'Neal's breaking the fourth wall and is like talking to you. It has this elongated car chase that goes through all of San Francisco for like 20 minutes, where all of these cars are going in these different places and everybody's trying to chase each other, and they're constantly causing damage where they'll drive over something. So the person will be like, oh, that's annoying. And then 3 other people will drive over it, and then they'll turn around and then drive over it like 4 more times. And so, yeah, this movie's just chaos. I loved every second of it. It was fucking hilarious.
Your description of it reminds me of when you described watching Bringing Up Baby. Is it a similar energy to that?
Yes. Bringing Up Baby is a good one too. Bringing Up Baby. That's another one where the female lead is annoying the shit out of the male lead. Like if you had a series, it would be What's Up Doc, Bringing Up Baby, The Heartbreak Kid, and A New Leaf, of just like the female lead bugging the shit out of the male lead. But it being really, really funny. So yeah, no, if you've not seen this, it's like 90 minutes. It's like from start to finish, just incredibly funny. It literally ends with like a whole gag with Looney Tunes. Yeah, fantastic. I watched it on HBO Max, so if you have that, check it out. But yeah, no, it's a good time. I was either gonna watch this or Deep Water, the erotic thriller, and I was like, good choice. Real quickly, I think let's look at the time. Yeah,
do it.
Make it quick. I'm gonna talk about After Yang, which is the latest or the second film from Kogonada, who I think we're big fans of on the podcast, where we talked a lot about Columbus, which was his entry film. This one is, I've thought about it a lot since watching it. You know, you can definitely tell it's from the same person, but very much whole different vibe. Where that one is like I think it feels almost like a sci-fi movie, because even though Columbus, Indiana is like a real place, there's something kind of like otherworldly just about like the modern architecture and the things that and like the way that he shoots and frames like these buildings and these works of art. Like it almost feels very otherworldly, and so it's like a sci-fi movie that takes place like in modern society. This one is like full, like there's no ambiguity. It's full sci-fi. It takes place like in this far off future where families are able to adopt these androids. And so this film kind of kicks off where you have Colin Farrell and Jodie Turner-Smith are a married couple. They have a Chinese adopted daughter, and I think these androids are there to like provide the daughter, or at least their android. I don't know if, again, they don't really go into like the whole sphere of these androids, but this android Yang is there to kind of provide cultural facts and just provide history of China to this adopted daughter of theirs, and is somewhat of like a kind of a surrogate brother. And so he malfunctions, and Jake, who is the Colin Farrell character, is trying to find a way to repair him. But the way this company who makes all of these androids is set up, you would have to like recycle the robot and have to get a whole new android. And so rather than doing that and, devastating his daughter, he finds this alternative method, and the alternative method will not bring Yang back to the state that he was in, where he was functioning. But they later learn, and it's not worth kind of explaining because it's very convoluted to a degree. He's going to be able to be preserved, but it won't be in the state that they're used to him being in. And so part of that is he has to, they access this chip inside of him that has all of these memories. And so Colin Farrell spends a lot of time with like this really funny, it's like a really thin, like the glasses are like this, and it's like these really thin glasses that like allow you to like watch through the memories. It's super funny because he's like sitting on the couch and he like has these like glasses on. And so a lot of the movie is him like seeing these memories, and all of them are coming through the point of view of Yang. And so he's seeing a lot of moments between his family and his daughter, and things, and even moments with him, but through the point of view of Yang. And that's kind of what I would say the gist of the movie is it's just kind of, it's kind of a contemplation on life through the eyes of somebody else. I think where I was immediately satisfied and on board with Columbus, this one, I had some stops and starts with. I think a lot of the, we have to fix this android plot is kind of boring. It's a lot of like Colin Farrell just going, well, why can't you fix him? Why can't you fix why can't you fix Yang? And like his nice, sexy Irish accent. That's just, I don't know, it just drags on, and then it gets like kind of convoluted. You have like all of these characters and like these relationships with these characters that you're just like, I don't really, they're kind of half-baked, so I don't really know what to do with it. But then the actual memory portions I really did like. It feels much more, it feels in congruity with like Kogonada's work in the type of video essays that he would do, which are these kind of like like these scenes in sequence that he's pulled together, kind of making a point, whether it's about Yasuhiro Ozu or Wes Anderson or something like that, where it's kind of like these fragmented moments that are all coalescing to kind of better represent who this android was and what he was, and who this family was through his eyes. And those are really, I think, really kind of moving, powerful moments. You have like 2 or 3 prolonged memory sequences where you like watch through the whole scene. The best one to me is the scene between Yang and the Colin Farrell character. And Colin Farrell's like job that he has is that he makes tea and he sells tea. And so there's this whole sequence where Yang is asking him about kind of like where he developed this passion for tea, and where, how he what made him like tea so much to this degree. And Colin Farrell's like explaining it, and he's talking about this documentary that he watched that I looked up, and is a real documentary that Werner Herzog is in. But it's just like this really, that doesn't really, like, you're just like, okay, so there's a sequence where he talks about tea for like 10 minutes. And it's like, yeah, like it's this kind of just really human moment, similar to like what you would expect from like Columbus, where like John Cho and Haley Lou Richardson are just kind of walking around, kind of talking about, connecting with each other about moments in their life. And you get a lot of that. And Haley Lou Richardson is in this as well. She's, I won't talk too much about her role. It's not like it's a super secretive thing, but I think it kind of, she works in later in the movie. She's not like somebody that you necessarily meet immediately. And so yeah, it was one, the more I've thought about it, I think I really like this movie. I don't like it as much as Columbus, but I think it was one that I really appreciate, like the direction and the just kind of the risk that he, not necessarily the risk, but just kind of like it's just one of those like indie sci-fis, but that is incredibly detailed and incredibly like thought out. And I don't know, I appreciated that. So I think it's, as folks who are fans of Columbus, I recommend seeing After Yang, because I think it's pretty good.
What a wild 2 weeks for Colin Farrell on the podcast. Between him doing
And
his
the
penguin
Batman.
voice.
I loved both roles.
No notes.
I mean, one movie, his role was pretty much, I'm gonna watch a clip of The Sopranos and just roll with it.
Yeah.
The next week, it's like, I don't know. I like tea.
Get you a man who can do both.
do both.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. No, I'm very proud of my Letterboxd review, which is the whole playing off the whole men would rather blank than go to therapy, and it was men would rather make tea than go to therapy.
Mm.
Which again, I think you guys would appreciate more if you saw the movie.
I would love to see the movie if it would be distributed in a theater near me.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is not the case.
Well, it is on Showtime, so get yourself a nice free trial to Showtime, and it's available there. Or sail the 7 seas. All right, we're gonna take a quick break, and then we will be back talking about anti-fascist YouTube videos after this. What a transition!
You said this was $3.97. No, it's $3.96.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Do I need to pause Audacity?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, how long have we had TikTok kids following us?
Oh, I was told about the TikTok thing like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think that's around when it went viral.
It did. I was like, there's 180,000 people who like this.
So one of my students who was a really big proponent for us doing Romeo and Juliet several years back, he actually wrote an essay and emailed it to me, and we read some of it on the podcast. Recently made a TikTok because I guess Romeo and Juliet was trending on TikTok for some reason. And he made a TikTok just explaining the Romeo and Juliet Cinematary saga. And it's like not even a good TikTok. It's a video of his face and just like a block of text.
Yeah, way too much text.
And he was like bragging about like, I wrote a 6-paragraph essay about Romeo and Juliet. And it's gone somewhat viral on TikTok. How many thousands of views you say it had?
When I don't know about the views. When I looked at it, like over 180,000 people had liked it.
Yeah, and I think the views are like at least 3 times that.
And he made like 2 follow-ups, including one where he just shared the link to the podcast.
Oh, sweet. Because I was upset that he did not say the name of the podcast in TikTok. But apparently there were people in the comments being like, tell your teacher he has a new fan.
It makes sense why the listens have gone up pretty
well. It's funny because like that episode is us just mercilessly dragging anyone who likes that movie. So and just Zoomers in general.
Yeah, that's why I was like, oh god. That's why I was more worried about the TikTok kids finding. I'm like, oh god, we just dragged them for 40 minutes.
Yeah,
but I'm glad they're listening. I think that on top of a whole series about Shrek really won them over.
Yeah.
Also, I was talking about it at work, and one of my coworkers said that she would be more than happy to come on the podcast and talk about Over the Hedge and how it best explains urban sprawl. So that's an option.
At what cost?
Yeah.
So that's just throwing that out there.
I don't want to watch Over the Hedge. Sorry.
Well, then we were looking at it. It has like 8 Ben Folds songs.
Yeah,
there's a
I
weird
think
thing with that. I don't know
if Rock in the Suburbs was written for the movie or was adapted for the movie, because Rock in the Suburbs is not a family-friendly song, but they use Rock in the Suburbs multiple times, and I think he also wrote some songs for the movie.
Yeah,
weird.
Anyway, that's just an option. We'll throw it out there.
I'm gonna take my dog out real quick.
Okay, I also need to get some water, so
yeah,
I will be right back.
1 second.
Dog out of the room or dog out like outside? Take it. Like, oh, I'll be back in 20 minutes. I'm gonna take the dog for a walk. Sparky. Well, it's just me here, guys, and gals, and everybody else. I don't know what to say. We're going to talk about not being fascist, which is a good decision to make. Don't be a fascist. Yeah. I don't know what to talk about now.
Zach, do you want me to do another little intro for this?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh. Have you finished Elden Ring, or is that something that you don't do? I'm not saying that sarcastic.
Oh, it's a thing that you can do. It's a very long game, and I think I was talking to Cam about where I'm at in it right now, and I think that the next required thing that I can do is basically the last boss fight. But it is a game that if you want to, you can kind of play it for an even longer time. I'm about to crack like 110 hours on it, which like I can beat the first Dark Souls game in like 3.5 hours now. If that gives you an idea of how big this game is. But I probably could finish it in another couple of sittings, or maybe even just one sitting if I do well at that last boss fight. But I'm probably going to savor it a little while longer and go do all the optional shit.
No, I get that.
How's Horizon Forbidden West treating you?
It's okay.
That's mostly what I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's kind of got that. Assassin's Creed problem where it's one of those where there's too much stuff.
And Elden Ring is the opposite. It's like, I mean, there is too much stuff. There's a lot of stuff, but it doesn't really like point you to any of it. It's like every time you find something, you're like, oh, cool, this is awesome. As opposed to it being like a checklist of chores you have to do.
Which I don't totally mind. I'm a very checklisty type of person with video games. I don't mind that, but like after a while, I'm just like, damn, this is some shit.
Give me a break.
Yeah. It's the animation though and stuff like in terms of it's gorgeous.
Yeah, from what I've seen, it looks really pretty.
Which game?
Horizon Forbidden West, Forbidden West.
Yeah.
I think Zach is Elden Ring curious right now. I don't know how serious you are about getting it.
Good place to start.
Mm-hmm. It depends on how I feel. Well, I definitely won't play it after this because it's such a long game that I
Yeah,
need to,
you
like,
probably need
I gotta-
a couple indies or something.
I got to take. Yeah, I'm gonna play a couple indies. I was gonna find some good Switch games to play to kind of just clean the palette. Or I'll play maybe some like NBA 2K or something just to kind of like get the palette out. And then I have been hankering to replay The Witcher 3 though, so I might do that.
That's also super long.
Yeah. But I just read a couple of the books, and so I kind of want to.
Oh, nice.
I kind of want to play some of the game.
They From Software, the creators of the Dark Souls games, recently made an announcement because of how well Elden Ring has done that they're going to make it into a franchise that quote unquote goes beyond the games. And I'm wondering if that means that maybe George R.R. Martin will write a book or something. And I would read that.
Yeah. No, the Witcher books were pretty good, and I like the TV show's fun. It's silly.
Oh yeah, Jesse loved it.
We tried watching the TV show, dude, and it was like the first episode lays it on so fucking hard that
lays
it was
what
like,
on?
Dude, it is like so many names, so many places, so much disconnected shit that I'm sure is like the point of the season is to like yank it all together.
Oh yeah, well it has like the witches and the mages. I don't give a shit about them. And then it has like this whole like the elves. I fucking hate the elves. I just want to watch Henry Cavill like grunt and like hit a monster thing.
There's like
I'm here for that.
There's like 2 action sequences in the first episode, and one of them is really like notably very good. Like where he's like
the action's very good.
He's like fighting through a city street basically.
Yeah.
And the choreography is amazing and it's really
fantastic.
Good. But it's like a minute long and the episode's like an hour long, and the rest of it is them being like, the so-and-so from such and such did this at the blah, 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 come to my magic tower and blah, 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 blah. We were like, holy fuck. It was so hard. Like, I don't know.
Well, because I read, they have these 2 books, and the books are kind of filling in, because the books that I've read are just like random stories that he's like been in, and so those also are episodes of the TV show. So like that episode, I was like, oh, I've already read that story, so I know what's going on.
I'm sure that kind of thing with like supplementary stuff would help, but
it does.
It's like something in it is a show that honestly probably could have benefited from like just bite the bullet, do the Lord of the Rings thing where you're like, okay, our first 5 minutes is just pure exposition, like somebody reading a storybook, because like just dropping into that much like names and lore and all that type of stuff it's such a fucking dive. I don't know.
Well, I mean, in The Witcher's defense, Cam, I think that like every Dark Souls opening cinematic does the exact same thing, right?
Sort of, but what happens after that is you're immediately set adrift, and then there's nothing, and you have to start piecing it together. But this is like tons of dialogue, tons of characters. Let's go. We got to keep moving. We got to get through this shit, so that we can get to the fun parts. Which I'm sure the fun parts are very fun, but we tapped out after the first episode. We were like, never mind.
You see, I did the same thing with Game of Thrones. I don't know anybody's name.
Yeah,
I don't care. I'm just like, when are we gonna like fight something, and like when is somebody gonna like bang, or like what's going, like where's something fun's gonna happen? I'm like, I don't care about like, because like they get in The Witcher, they get into like this whole political thing, and I'm like, these are fake politics. I don't give a fuck about like elves.
Maybe you wouldn't like the Souls games, Zach, because it is very like fake politics, but I think the politics are very interesting.
Oh, see, that's fine. I just would be like, all right, whatever. I'm gonna go.
Also, you can just say whatever.
You can absolutely just ignore
that's
it.
That's what's
too.
gonna happen.
I meant to say, so one of the things we're about to talk about is a video of.
It's not fake politics.
It's not fake politics, unfortunately.
Real positive.
But so like Philosophy Tube, the video that we're watching was pre-transition.
Yeah, she has since come out as trans.
It's a she/her situation now, but in the video we watched, it was very much not that. So just I guess something to be like aware of. I don't know.
Yeah,
like there are differing opinions about what you should do with that. So
I didn't in her coming out video, didn't she say like you should think about my old videos as me playing a character?
Yeah, as someone else basically.
And so like I think if you're looking at it from that perspective, you use the pronouns of the character, but
are you talking about the wrestling person? Like the tank top person?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, the firefighter.
Yeah.
Firefighter. I was like, I knew there was something.
He's anti-fire.
Yeah. Anti-fire. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they got too. We can talk about it. It got too theatery for me.
That's the theatery one. I knew you would say that. Yeah.
I didn't like that one. All right, let's talk about them.
Okay. Yeah. Let me get all Audacity ready to go. Okay.
The other ones were like information. I was like, there we go.
I knew that would be your take, Zach.
I've already seen the alt-right playbook though, so I
thought you had seen the Charlottesville one.
I had seen that too, actually.
Oh, okay.
Because I had watched that after I read this. I'd seen that in the. I remember I had seen it. I was confusing it though with the Vice one.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd seen both.
Yeah.
I just, for whatever reason, I thought it was the Vice one first.
I've never seen the Vice one, so I'll be curious when we get into it to hear your take on like how this like differs in the like how it's using the medium. But
there is a one very operative difference about them, which we can just talk about in the.
Yeah, let's save it.
Okay. All right, in 3, 2, 1. And we are back with part 2 of episode 396 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be continuing.
Hold on, sorry. Time
out.
No! Time out.
We can't just start these without any technical hangups.
I can't get mine to. Do I need to start a new one, or
you can? Or you can keep it going. It's up to you.
Okay. So there's two ways you can do it, Cam. You can either just save the audio file you have as like an MP3 or whatever, and then delete it and start over.
Okay.
Or you could mute it and make a new track and start from there.
Okay, sorry. Hang on.
We're trying, dog.
I know. Export as MP3 to the desktop. What's this episode? Sorry.
396.
Okay. So 396 part 1. Okay. Okay, sorry. I should have done this already. I didn't know. I'm not super versed here.
You're good. All right. In 3.
Wait, hold on. It's still exporting. Hang on. I'm sorry. Got 30 more seconds.
Andrew, on Facebook Memories, I guess 7 years ago today, we put out an episode where I think we talked about the Babadook because I did a Babadook impression, according to Jessica.
Good.
Which was one of the movies I was thinking about in the whole, like, we should rewatch movies that we were, very high on when we started the podcast.
It was formative, yeah.
Okay. 1 second. Make sure. 396 part 1. We got it. Let me just bring this one up and okay. Sorry, fellas. I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome back to part 2 of episode 396 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Cahiers du YouTube series with.
Let me settle on that name.
I just settled on it. I thought that was the most clever one. With a collection, a trio of anti-fascist YouTube video essays. But Andrew, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Yeah, so the videos we're talking about in this week's episode kind of differ from the nature of the ones in last week's episode, where, last week we're kind of doing an auteurism thing, looking at a lot of different videos by the same creator and talking about their cinematic style. And here we're more like connecting thematically. We're focusing on a particular thematic interest of this community of like left tube or bread tube or whatever you want to call it.
Why is it
bread? This is kind of a long, stupid story.
It's a reference.
Never mind.
It's just a reference to a book. That's all.
Okay.
The book is.
I don't want to know. No.
People listening want to know. I will say it. The book is called The Conquest of Bread by Kropotkin, who's like an anarchist philosopher.
I regret this.
And people like this, the label actually got ascribed to the community by Reddit. Like there was just a Reddit community where like, hey, look at all these cool lefty YouTube video essayists. Let's call them something. And they called them BreadTube because of like, quote unquote, the bread book. And most of the members of that community don't really like that name very much. But anyways, one thing that we're sort of doing in this series is doing kind of like a rough historical survey of like some of the big names and big videos in this, wave of YouTube culture, I guess. And I mentioned last week that the whole thing kind of got kicked off as a reaction to Gamergate in 2014. Leftists trying to sort of reclaim the YouTube space for their political side, and with the Trump administration, and then especially with the Charlottesville rally a couple years later. Like the whole like left tube community really rallied around that, and there was just a lot of YouTube videos about like how to recognize fascism, and like the first video that is currently listed on ContraPoint's channel is called like decrypting the alt-right, how to identify a fascist, I think. And I thought about including that here, but we've already done too much ContraPoint. So the three videos that we're talking about here are Steve Bannon by PhilosophyTube, a channel run by Abigail Thorne, who was then going by a different name when she made this YouTube video because she's since come out as trans, as well as a video called Always a Bigger Fish by Ian Danskin, who runs a YouTube channel called Innuendo Studios. That video is actually part of a larger series that I wish we could dedicate a whole episode to, but it would be probably way too long. That series is called The Alt-Right Playbook, and it's kind of like a rhetorical style guide for how conservatives kind of like manipulate political conversations to their advantage. And that is kind of like required reading. I know we're not spending a whole lot of time on it in this episode. We're just talking about one like 20-minute video. But if any of this is of interest to you, like you should definitely watch the Alt-Right Playbook. It's like some of the best stuff on the YouTube platform. And then lastly,
I co-sign that.
Yeah. I would say like the crown jewel of the things we're talking about in the episode today, and like one of my favorite YouTube videos is called Charlottesville, the True Alt-Right. It is by the YouTuber known only as Sean. And that is an hour-long, basically documentary, found footage documentary, sort of piecing together the events of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally using live streams that were uploaded by the Nazis who attended the rally themselves. So we can kind of go through this in any order. We can jump back and forth. But yeah,
we can just.
Where do you guys want to go?
Let's just go in the order that you just kind of laid them out.
Sure. I think that it does make the most sense to start with the Abigail Thorne video because it's a really good transition point from ContraPoints last week. I'm sure that you can tell, Zach, watching it after, like mainlining all this ContraPoint stuff, that this is like directly influenced from ContraPoints. Like Abigail Thorne is a friend of Natalie Wynn, who AKA ContraPoints, and Abigail used to be making a very different type of YouTube video. They were much more kind of, the PBS style explainy videos that were, she cited PBS Idea Channel as her primary inspiration at the time. And then ContraPoints kind of burst on the scene and changed everything up. and Abigail Thorne decided to essentially like not necessarily mimic, but create a new style that was sort of inspired and influenced by what Contra was doing with like the theatrics and the costumes and the characters and the lighting and all that stuff, as well as the music. One thing I neglected to mention last week is that ContraPoint's videos tend to have original scores, and that the same is true for
good classical music picks. I didn't mention that last week.
Yeah, classical music done on like really cool analog synthesizers. So that's really neat. And you may have also noticed that ContraPoints' voice shows up in the Steve Bannon video as like a reader of a quote. That's sort of a convention of the genre. Like people who are in this community of leftist YouTubers, often when they have a quote they need to cite, they just get another person from the community to read that quote aloud in the video. And so you can kind of like recognize people's voices and maybe even like get turned on to other channels based on who's featured in them, which in this particular video, there's one guest feature that I would not recommend going and checking out her content because it has since gone down the crapper, but we don't need to get into that. But Zach, I know that this one felt very theater kiddie, I'm sure, like ContraPoints, because Abigail Thorne is also like an actress and does that on top of the YouTube stuff. But what were your thoughts on this compared to the Contra stuff last week?
It was about the same. This one didn't do much for me. I think I just want the information. I don't need you to dress it up, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah.
It's about the extent of my thoughts.
And for people who are listening to this who haven't watched the videos, which I'm sure there's plenty, the way that it kind of gets dressed up in that video is there's these two characters that Abigail Thorne is playing. There's the firefighter and the arsonist. And from the perspective of the firefighter, you know, that character is just sort of explaining the political strategy of Steve Bannon, who very recently when the video was made was like chief strategist in the Trump White House, but also was kind of like, you know, helping pull a bunch of strings behind the scenes for various far right political campaigns around the world, and is like very much a fascist, but is pretty good at concealing that to most people who don't know better. And then the arsonist sections is like a complete fiction, right? It's like a character kind of existing in another sort of fantastical universe who's just like talking to you, the viewer. And so it does feel stagey or cinematic or something. This also is the only video that we're looking at, I think, that has a subtitle at the beginning. It says like Steve Bannon, a philosophy tube film.
Yeah.
Which I think when I saw that, definitely like it is maybe like one of the impetuses for me eventually wanting to do this series of like inspired me to start thinking about these, like, well, how is this different than a film?
Can we talk about that rather than the content itself? Because to me,
Sure.
not because I'm like disinterested in Steve Bannon, but more like that. I think that's probably the core of like what the series is. And so, like, to me, that's what I was trying to think about when I was getting past the, theater. And so I get it. You know, I think it's they're trying to shape it as more of like so if I'm gonna classify something as a film, it's not, it's not necessarily it has anything to do with like the production value, how it's shot, things like that, because a lot of that stuff can get you can shoot something that's quote unquote cinematic for TV show or TikTok or something like that. I mean, that's what the crazy thing about iPhones and stuff now are. I mean, you can shoot stuff like really nicely. I think more I would define like a movie or a film as something that is like one cohesive linear structure, like you have a beginning, middle, and end that all takes place within one contained thing, compared to like a TV show, which is broken, which is episodic and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I guess I understand why she would classify this as a film. by that definition, I didn't think it was a good film.
Sure. And this was the one of the three that we watched this week that I think has aged the poorest. There were things about it that I didn't like as much as I did when I first watched it.
Yeah, I think that there was I think at the time that all of these like came out close to, you know, each other, the three that we watched for this, right? And like I think in that stretch, I think there was maybe I think a feeling of urgency by the people who were making these things that maybe gave them a little bit of room from everyone else to this idea of like trying to shift this cultural narrative on YouTube or whatever. Like I think it gave people a lot wider of a berth on terms of like what they would kind of watch and be like, well, that was a little, you know, whatever. And I felt like that when I was watching the
Steve Bannon.
Yeah, the Steve Bannon one. A couple of, I mean, I still think that it's ultimately kind of valuable for the information, but on terms of like, there were things I think when I very first saw it that I thought were, that I just didn't really think too much of, really. And then when I rewatched it this time, like especially I found like the end credits bit a little bit like, okay, like there are bits about it that I thought were a little like maybe self-serious to a degree that I didn't love. But I think that like the thing about the Philosophy Tube's channel in general is that I think that she has like this really, really funny and like sharp sense of humor, right?
Yeah.
And I like it when I think that I like her videos more that sort of like lean into that. And the bits that in the Steve Bannon video that were kind of like brushing up against that still worked really well for me. But for the majority of it, I was kind of like, okay, you know, that was sort of how I like felt about it, because I was also trying to think about it like in this, with regards to this, like as a movie, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what bits of it work as a movie, what bits of it don't work as a movie or as a film. And
she is like taking it very seriously as like I'm creating a work of art. I'm creating like absurdist theater or something here. Well, and like for me, there's a spectrum of like how much of that. I mean, for everybody, there's a spectrum of like how much of that is going to be tolerable. Yeah. And I think that Contra almost always is like right on, like in like the sweet spot for me. And for Philosophy Tube, I think that the stuff with the Arsonist is about as far as I'm willing to go. And then like at the end of the video when she's singing Why We Build the Wall from Hadestown, which I'm actually very grateful for, because this is the video that told like essentially showed me Hadestown. Like I got super into Hadestown after watching this. So I'm grateful for that reason. But I think that, you know, her performance of that song is like way too self-serious at the end of this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think describing it as like as kind of like theater, like I guess for the context of this series, bad movies, but if it's theater, I think that makes more sense, because if you think about it, like you're adding your information dumping to a degree with like just kind of explaining the path of Steve Bannon, his rise to prominence.
Yeah.
Which that stuff, you know, is fine, but then like the need to add this performance element to it, like it like that staginess, it becomes less of like a cohesive narrative and more of like performance art, which
I think
which is fine, but that's just not what we're talking about.
I think it's partially a side effect of like the material conditions of it being created, because these are all things that are being made by like one person in their apartment, right? And they are trying to be very artistically ambitious with like the lighting and the costuming and all that stuff, but ultimately like they have these camera rigs that they can't take out of their house particularly conveniently. So the way to do that is to make it essentially theater, where you have just characters like sitting in a room talking to each other. And both this and one of the ContraPoints videos we didn't talk about are kind of directly inspired by a specific strain of like absurdist theater. This one, the Steve Bannon video, is inspired by a play called The Arsonists. And there's a ContraPoints video that's inspired by the play Rhinoceros by Eugene Ionesco, which is an amazing play. So they are kind of operating more in a theatrical mode than a cinematic mode, but just because it's like recorded video, it kind of falls under the realm of cinema by definition, I guess.
Well, and I think this is a good like trio, because if we're also looking at, I understand also the need to kind of do something with the information in order to, it's, kind of
edutainment. You got to make it snappy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get that. I have to reckon with that on a daily basis of how can we get this information that people need to know into their brains in a way that they'll actually engage with, and not just like eyes go into the back of their heads. And like this one, I think goes like way too goes very far into the let's make it entertaining, because I think like the next one we're going to talk about is a nice happy medium, because I think that's you have this kind of it's literally animating the whole, the information that you're getting, but it does it in a way that I think it's the perfect degree of animation where it's not too flourishy, but it's also giving you the information that you need to know.
There is kind of a divide too, where I think that there are some people who make videos in this space. The ContraPoints is one of them. Philosophy Tube is another, where it's very much on that wavelength of it being like we're doing a performance thing, but
there's even like an usher coming on stage to give you like, here's the exit is to the far left. Right?
On the other side though, I think that I think that there are lots of people operating in this that I think it's easier to just think of it more like documentary, which is kind of like what the third thing we're going to talk about is. But a lot of to me, the most like I engage with these in kind of a different way. Like I typically, the first time that I watch these things, it's normally like while I'm at work and I have it like running in the background, you know what I mean? And I'm like listening to it, and then we'll go back, and if I liked it or something, I'll watch it again later or something like that. But like the stuff that hits and lands has always landed best for me and continues to do so now, is the stuff that leans more into the documentary style, I guess, as opposed to the performance style. And so I definitely see like where that could rub against. I think that it's kind of one of those things where it's like a trying to get butts and seats type of thing. And obviously there was a very, very high level of like response, like positive response to like the way that the videos on the ContraPoints channel were being received. And so like I think that some people were just gonna inevitably chase down that whole rabbit hole, whereas other people kind of do other things. And so on the whole thing of like talking about what it is, a movie or a film or whatever, I don't know. It is kind of interesting because it reminds me a little bit of like, oddly enough, like the like Hideo Kojima video game thing, right? Like he's the first person who ever in a video game, it popped up and said directed by Hideo Kojima, right?
Yeah.
He was the first person to ever do that. Now that's like a pretty common term, is to say like, a game has a director. But at the time it wasn't. He was the first person who did that. And he, oddly enough, is one of the people that's like, video games aren't art. But he's like put directed by.
Yeah, and I don't think Abigail Thorne puts the a film by Abigail Thorne on her videos anymore. But it was like kind of a ballsy swing, and I think that worth doing, right? From the perspective of a Cahiers du YouTube, like really asking the viewer to engage with this medium in a different way.
Right.
But I think we should probably transition to talking about the second video, because you've already kind of got into it a little bit, Zach. So Always a Bigger Fish from Innuendo Studios / Ian Danskin. This is a video that for a long time isn't really about fascism. It's about, because he says at the beginning, like, okay, so in this series, if you've been watching the series, we've talked about what Democrats seem to believe. We've talked about what fascists seem to believe. We've talked about what nihilists seem to believe. Let's talk about what quote unquote conservatives seem to believe. And so most of it is about a unpacking of like the underlying assumptions of the Republican specifically ideology. And then it, like, by the end of it, it kind of becomes about fascism, in the same way that the Steve Bannon video is like, well, here's what this guy claims he believes, but here's what is like actually the philosophy that ties it all together, and it's like almost indistinguishable from fascism. So that's the argument that's being made.
And I think in a more interesting way, how it's, you can say they're different, but the logic in between is so flimsy that it lends itself to become the other thing.
Yeah, right. He says like something at the end where like, I'm not saying that the conservative ideology is fascism, but it's an ideology that fascism maps onto in a way that, you know, leftism like doesn't. Because like the main like philosophical distinction that he's making is like leftist politics generally are trying to redistribute power and make more of like flatten hierarchies. Whereas more right-wing politics is generally attempting to consolidate power and create hierarchies, whether those hierarchies are based on race, class, gender, whatever.
Doesn't matter, it's just money.
Yeah. Essentially like the established power structure, which is like a very specific race, class, gender, etc. But this is, like Zach mentioned, in like a kind of almost flash animation style where he just like draws these little stick figures and has them not necessarily like moving, but kind of like popping here and there to illustrate different ideas. But I don't know, what are y'all's thoughts on this, looking at this as like a visual, through like a visual lens,
like as a short, basically?
Yeah,
it's like a short film. I think it works. It's, you know, it does work, I think, because even though it's part of a multi-video series, it very much can kind of live on its own. And that's the same with the other ones that you described. I think the other one that's really good is the one about Democrats. You know, we go high, low. They go low.
I love that video. Yeah,
it's really really good. But I think just as like self-contained shorts, like absolutely, I think it's you know, I think there's a cohesive beginning to end structure that I think would qualify it as, I guess, under the definition of film. It's not like he's necessarily, he leaves everything, I guess, on the table. You know, you don't feel like he's leading you into other videos, but you feel like you're getting a, you know, first, second, third act type situation as you're watching the 20 minutes. So
yeah.
Very good.
In terms of like the structure and how it's distributed, it is more similar to a TV show than a movie, just because it's episodic and, you know, it's called a playbook. I almost feel like I'm reading through chapters of a nonfiction anthology or something. He also has videos that he calls footnotes, or end notes, I think. So of the things we're talking about today, like this is the one that feels the least like cinema to me, but I still wanted to kind of have the alt-right playbook represented and kind of have it in there as like another point on the line of like different ways of dealing with this particular thematic concern of the community.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that. Like it's like, it is maybe the least like cinematic or whatever, but I do think that it still is like, I think it does, as Zach was saying, kind of work as a short on terms of it having this like, here's where we're starting with like this fictional conversation. Let's talk about like the, you know, what's happening in between here, and then it has a very clear like, here's where we're wrapping up. And the like the animated elements of it are nice. It seems to be like put together well and all that.
Really accessible.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point of the entire, and maybe of Innuendo Studios channel in general.
Well, so like to compare it to the one we just talked about in the last episode, it's I guess this version of the flourishes, the animation is not like pulling you away from the information or trying to like over,
it's just clarifying.
It's just clarifying. It's
Yeah.
going, I'm giving you the information, but this is also reaffirming it to you instead of just kind of going, like, as you described before, like into the absurd, just to kind of really, overemphasize the point that it's making.
Yeah.
And I think there is kind of a danger in looking at these video essays through the lens of this podcast, where, we're a podcast that evaluates films and kind of like passes judgment on what films we think are good and bad and all that stuff. Whereas like, if you look at these video essays through that lens, if you're only evaluating them for like, well, how close to cinema are they? How cinematic are they? I think we may be like at risk of missing the point, right? Where I would say that the Philosophy Tube video is way more cinematic than this video, but I think this video is way more successful at what it's trying to do than the Philosophy Tube video. Because like ultimately what all these creators are trying to do is, the way I've heard it described is, they're standing on a street corner handing out pamphlets, right? And instead of handing out like copies of the Communist Manifesto, they're doing these little, sometimes bite-sized, sometimes feature-length, little edutainment things in order to like hook people in and get people thinking and ultimately push people further left. And I think the alt-right playbook does that better than almost anybody.
Yeah. It's
And
very, very good at that.
and that's why, like, I began this by maybe giving a very dumb explanation of what is a film, what is a TV show, that kind of stuff. Just because, I think, if we're gonna qualify it under those terms, like, it fails. But that doesn't mean the ideas are incorrect or not well explained. It's just, you have this performance element that's you have to kind of, at least on the terms that we're looking at it, you have to assess.
Sure.
So,
we have anything else to say about the alt-right playbook vid before we move on to our final one?
It's the best one if you want to just like throw it at somebody. It's like,
honestly,
incredible at being able to be like, I feel like I remember hearing this somewhere before, that kind of thing. It's really, really, really good at that.
And if you watch all the alt-right playbook videos, like, they are, they do a amazing job at like kind of recontextualizing political discourse. Like when I hear my wife have an argument with her dad, I will notice like, oh, he's doing this strategy from the alt-right playbook. And like, he's probably not aware of the fact that he's using that rhetorical strategy, but like, there are hallmarks to how political discourse tends to work. And I think clarifying is a good word for what this thing does. But anyways, last video on our list, Charlottesville, the True Alt-Right by Sean. Sean is a video essayist who he's almost like a podcaster more than anything else. Like, most of his YouTube videos have almost nothing going on visually at all. Like, they are often just a black screen with like a kind of grayed out skull. Like, his icon is like a skull with sunglasses on, just hanging out in the background. I think this was a thing for a lot of like the Gamergator, like right-wing YouTube videos back in like 2014. A lot of them would like have these little cartoon mascots that would be on screen, like explaining why SJWs are dumb or something. And I think Sean, maybe, I'm guessing here, was like doing his own version of that to kind of cater to that audience.
No, he specifically did it as like a mockery of it. Yeah, that was the whole
So like, usually the only thing that's happening visually is that, and then maybe he'll like throw a quote up on screen, which can make his videos kind of hard to watch.
As hard as this to watch?
He has
there you go.
We're back. Anyways, he actually has, to get an idea of like, the denseness and like just the audio focus of Sean's videos. He has a 2.5 hour video essay called The Bell Curve that is like debunking that whole like pseudoscience book about like, intelligence being distributed along a bell curve. And it's just him like pulling quotes from the book and then pulling like scientific studies and debunking them. And like, it's very droll. But but it is very amusing if you get on his wavelength. And the Charlottesville video is, I think, pretty unique in Sean's catalog in that it is so visual. Like, I do feel like I'm watching a found footage documentary. Like, I know there's a documentary, I forget what it's called, that's like the hour leading up to 9/11 or something, or maybe the hour after 9/11, using like cell phone footage from people who are on the street level. And I feel like I'm watching something like that when I'm watching this. And I actually really like certain things about the digital, like, data moshy graininess of the footage. That's like definitely wasn't like created with any sort of artistic intent, because it's just like Nazis live streaming or whatever. But it feels kind of like appropriately gross, and also appropriately like it feels like the digital world and the physical world are colliding in this really hideous way. Yeah, Zach, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I know you've watched it before and like it, but you also mentioned off mic that you also watched the Vice documentary about Charlottesville, which does get quoted at a couple points in Sean's video. And I'm curious, like, what you make of the differences between the video that's made by an outlet like Vice versus a video that's made by a tiny creator like Sean.
Yeah. Sean, better journalism in this one.
Yeah.
It is.
Better journalism.
Yeah.
It's good journalism in this one. I mean, I think that, it's out of the three. That's why I say we had a good trio, because, all, you take all of the theatrics of the first one, and it's just all cut down for this one.
This is just the raw data, right?
Yeah. This I think the closest thing you could probably associate it to is like a Frederick Wiseman or like documentary or something like that, just because it's just very bare bones. But I think, to me personally, I think that this is the only an optimal way to assess this type of content, because I think that you run the risk of sensationalizing it by adding that absurdist flourish to it, like ContraPoints and like Philosophy Tube. Not that they're actively trying to do that. I just think that should, like, you kind of it's just the way that you engage. And this one, I think, strips it down so that it, like, yes, it can be kind of dull and boring, and I say that not as a slight to it, but it's just like it's stripping this down to go, this is just the nuts and bolts of this. There's nothing fantastical about anything that these people are doing. And so let's get to
there's nothing like cool or entertaining about it either.
Exactly.
And something that this video does really well is, like, because his register is so level, and he's like talking so matter-of-factly all the time, and just being like, here's a thing I found, hey, check this out, here's like the submission to have a protest that I pulled from City Hall and stuff like that, right? And since all of that is so operating at that level, when just straight up bile that some of these people kind of spew at times, when you hear it, it like punches through really hard, because you're like, oh my God, like, you're in the middle of listening to something that's on this energy level. And he will even say at times, like, just a fair warning, this is pretty intense to hear people say.
He invites his watchers to skip ahead if they don't want to hear the
and I think that the thing that you learn about people like who he's documenting in this is that they really thrive off of the reaction. Like like they sit there, like that's how they thrive. They thrive off you. They
want to trigger the lips.
Exactly. And so like that's why I say this is the optimal way to handle this subject, because it's not being it's just going, this is like I was incredibly impressed with his breakdown of the different how the police failed to situate the protest and the counter protest in the zones.
That's some really good journalism.
It's super fantastic because I think it's really easy to be like, the police are fucking, pigs, and we hate police, and they're, we're anti-police, and just kind of getting into this very like leftist rhetoric. And it's like, no, like, let's just break down like just the basic, basic poor job that they did. And so you naturally are like, oh yeah, they're just inept, not because of any fantastical rhetoric. No, it's just, here is why they're like they failed this entire day, because they didn't understand the plan. The other agency did not understand the plan, because the police didn't understand the plan. And so it just, again, it's just kind of, it's dull journalism. But I'm like, no, it's explaining exactly how this was all set up. It wasn't because of anything sensational. It's just, it's as with anything, it's just ineptitude and stupidity.
Yeah. Well, that I have also seen the Vice documentary, and one of the things that, I mean, the thing to me that stands out as the most different, and the thing that I give like major points to Sean here, as opposed to the Vice documentary, is I feel like because he was so inundated in like internet culture already, and had already kind of like figured out, the stupidity of it, as opposed to like this shocking thing or whatever. The Vice documentary makes these people like seem very, very, very scary, like, and very, very, very dangerous. And
here they're pathetic.
Exactly. Which isn't to say that they can't also be dangerous, because they obviously can. Heather Heyer was killed at Charlottesville because of stupidity and danger mixing together. Right. But like Sean's thing is more highlighting the like, these are like petulant. It's petulance. It's not like, it's not this like, they aren't this like super well organized, well-oiled machine that is, organically doing all this stuff. And we're not playing like a low drone behind them every time they talk. And we're not like interviewing them and letting them just like say all this crap and cut to our journalist who is acting all scandalized when she hears it. Like, instead he is just like, these are a bunch of dweebs who gathered around in a park and got to some stupid shit. And like, let me tell you how that stupid shit was permitted to happen.
Because basically, if you present them as like these dangerous, edgy villains, like there's a certain brand of online guy who is really attracted to that, right? So, like, but if you portray them as losers, and he doesn't even really have to portray them that way, because they just are. Like, he just lets them speak for themselves. Like, shows their live stream. Here's how
it's kind of a perfect contrast to like what Cam's describing with the Vice documentary, because they also let them talk, but even though it's a little bit different, because Sean's not face to face with them, having to react to what they're saying. Like the Vice reporter, she doesn't do a great job, because their whole goal is to just kind of, they want you to react from what you're seeing, and that to be your takeaway. She never really makes an effort to, whenever Chris Cantrell like says something, and she never like counteracts it. She just kind of lets him say it and lets you, the viewer, go, oh, like, that's terrible for him to say that. That's that's super anti-Semitic.
As the only person here who has not seen the Vice documentary, is the basic like thrust or argument of that video like, check out how scary these guys are, because it seems like
check out how scary this whole event is. I mean, the whole torch sequence is terrifying.
It is made out to be like very, very, very spooky and sensational, which, I mean, to be fair, it's not a good thing. I'm not saying that it's
it's a very scary thing,
but it is scary. But like, there's this thing that gets knocked around, where people will like go use this like phrase that like fascism is a loser ideology, right? Like, and it's that what makes it so dangerous is in this space is that it is for like losers and like all that shit, who kind of like get around each other and then get empowered by this energy that's coming off of people who are acting very scared of them, and then like get up to some stupid shit. But there are people who are scared of them for very good reason. That's not to diminish that. But like but I guess my point is, they didn't need Vice's help to like look spooky, you know what I mean? But the Vice documentary absolutely does like use musical cues and like all this type of shit, and like just leaves some things hanging that are supposed to just simply shock you or make you feel scared, which is, you know, whatever. It's not a good thing that these people are here, but it's not like one of the things that stands out to me that I really like in Sean's documentary thing is that he has that whole bit of like where one of these morons like thinks he's been pepper sprayed and he doesn't know. And he's like crying and yelling for help. And then his other idiot friends convince him to spray soap in his own eyeballs. And then he does it and he's like crying and screaming for help and all this. And Sean like sets aside like 2 straight minutes of showing this because it's pathetic. It's stupid. It makes the guy look like a goon. And he also shows the guy that
at
like,
one point the guy's just like, are you sure this will work? And the other guy's like, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's just soap. It's just soap. And then there's the other thing where he makes sure to highlight the guy that like got caught out by himself alone, and he's scared of all of the counter protesters.
He takes his
pretends
clothes off.
He pretends he was just there for fun and takes all of his clothes off, and everybody is like sitting there making fun of him, and like stuff like that. I feel like is what gives this kind of an edge that the Vice one kind of like lacked, because the Vice one is trying to be edgier and like trying to be more punchy and
well, it's really inserting itself into the situation. I mean,
they
it
have a reporter there face to face with people.
Yeah, and it doesn't do. I mean, and you can be involved in. I mean, think about something as like iconic in terms of like being involved in a documentary as like Harlan County, USA.
Right.
But I mean, at this point, with this one, she's one, involved in the situation, and 2, never really countering it or challenging anything. Their whole goal is just to let you soak it in.
Yeah.
And
the reason I asked about the ultimate goal of the Vice documentary is that I think that Sean's goal goes a little above and beyond just, hey, look at these people. I mean, he is just showing us what went down at Charlottesville on a certain level, but he's also making a broader, more abstract argument about the way that people conceal their true political intentions, right? He's going back and forth between this guy, James Alsop, who was there, like his video after the fact where he's trying to kind of backpedal and make him like cover up for himself versus the things that he actually did and said at the rally. And I think that's sort of the thing that ties all these videos together. It's sort of a common theme with like a lot of left tube videos about fascism. And that has been really eye-opening for me, frankly, like to recognize the way in which, you know, a lot of political actors do not believe what they say they believe, right? They are obfuscating their true intentions. And like Steve Bannon does this, the always a bigger fish guy is talking about, the hierarchical assumptions behind like almost every Republican talking point. And then of course, like even people as malicious, like obviously villainous as neo-Nazis will try to play defense for their own optics. And once I think that like, I mean, I'm not going to speak for everybody, I guess, but that was a big shift for me. Like once I started to kind of see beyond what somebody was saying and kind of thinking about what are they not saying, what are they actually meaning, and it kind of like shifted the way that I think about and engage with politics, just generally.
I think another like strength of this thing you were mentioning about like going above and beyond of just displaying it or whatever is that the Vice documentary that we're kind of comparing this to also sort of has that feeling of like a lot of those like, circa 2016 liberals have just now sort of seemed to figure out that there are racists or something. Like it has that energy of like, where did these people come from? Who even knows?
You guys know about this shit?
Yeah. And then I think to the credit of Sean's video, it's very, very good about being like, yeah, it's this guy. He's been around forever. This guy's he's
Identity Europa.
Yeah,
Here's
been
what
running this website for like 10 years. Yeah, he's right there. That's him. And like, dude, I think going back to the thing about it, like as a movie, like watching.
And I think this one like unequivocally is like to me, this feels like a movie.
I think I agree with that. I think that this one just feels like a journalist documentary thing that is very similar to things that you see about all kinds of like, you know, civil or social problems or whatever. And whether or not that was his intention, I don't know. But I think it can be like watched that way and appreciated that way. And I agree with you too about the whole like the fact that he had to find like re-upload of a stream that got pulled down. And so a lot of there's like some crazy like digital artifacting and like data mosh that's just like tearing these images apart, like when he's just showing them. And it's like, it's great because it feels so grimy, like when it's like showing those bits, like you were saying. And I think that it has like value there on terms of not just being like, you know, a video essay, but also working as like a documentary film.
It's like an artifact.
Yeah.
Zach, anything else about this video or any of the videos we've talked about today?
No, I can't recommend the first one. The other two, I highly recommend because the only thing I'll end on is I agree. I think both of them in even broadly the alt-right playbook in like the whole series are good ways to reconfigure how to think about political discourse.
Yes, for sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Letterboxd or on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Thank you. Head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Cinematary. Thank you to our patrons, Cam.
Hey.
Chad Newsom, Corey Willingham, Harry Eskin, Candace Sisson, Ron Hayes, Teresa Marstathi, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, Andrew, what do we got?
Next week, we are looking at a collection of YouTube videos that won an award. It won the Hugo Award. I forget what the title of that award was.
I think it was for a documentary or something.
Yeah, for best documentary. Yeah. But it's 3 YouTube videos by the YouTuber Lindsay Ellis, who has just recently retired from YouTube because of a lot of harassment she was getting. But they are videos about the Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies. And I wanted to like present this as like a representation of like how maybe like the pinnacle of what YouTube media criticism can look like, because a lot of like lefty YouTube video essays and just like YouTube video essays in general, like the video essays on Cinematary's YouTube channel, just function as like, here's an analysis of this piece of art and how it works. But Lindsay Ellis and other creators like her usually kind of use that as an opportunity to also talk about like the political underpinnings of the work of art. And for this one specifically, she's kind of talking about the creation of the work of art, which required her to fly to New Zealand and like interview people who worked on the film. And it truly does feel like the amount of effort that would go into like a feature-length documentary, but it's just 3 YouTube videos. So we will look at all 3 of those. I think they all have different titles. So I don't know off the top of my head what their titles are, but Lindsay Ellis's Hobbit trilogy is next week.
Do we have to watch the Hobbits as well?
No.
I would not recommend it.
Yeah. In fact, don't.
Yeah.
All right. Until next week. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Ron's going to hate that. That was a long one.
Sorry,
Uh-oh.
Ron.
Sorry, Ron.